Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Noir November, bleeding into December, is here with a discussion about the film Brick. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back, Hashheads, to your favorite podcast, hosted by the cream on the upper crust,
and not the pie tin grease. Oh, I forgot what he called the other people. He's the grease on the pie plate or something. I remember that.
Welcome back to Reels on the Rocks, where we yap at you about movies.
Oh, I see. We learned some new slang.
We're getting close to the end of the year, so yeah, we're doing neo-noirs. You could call it Noir November. You know, if these episodes come out on time. As of recording, we still haven't put out the Tremors episode yet. So apologies, but
and
you guys know us by now.
That's my fault in two ways. The only one I'm going to talk about, though, is the one that has to do with the fact that I have cheap headphones that are overly sensitive.
Yeah, if there's any awkward cuts, we had a fun time recording the last one. But T has some topics to get to.
Yeah, so
I'm curious.
Just some brief ones that we will, get to be able briefly kind of just react to and discuss. So the first one is, and this was actually just announced today, that despite Folie à Deux doing poorly, Lady Gaga has signed on to do season 2 to be, I don't know if she's gonna be a main character in it or just like she's gonna show up in Wednesday.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm kind of excited because I was worried that people would be kind of gun shy with her, as people usually are after.
No, well, she's had more hits than misses. It's kind of the same way, like, Joaquin Phoenix's career is not going to end because the movie sucks. I'm sure some things might slow down because of that other project you were telling me about that he got cold feet on, but. Like she's done, she's nominated for Best Actress. I forgot it. She didn't win, did she?
No,
so long.
She didn't win. She did get an Oscar though for writing Shallow. Yeah.
Yep. So there you go. She's Oscar winner, and also won't give my full review until the finale.
Right.
And I encouraged T to check the movie out, but I don't think it was that bad, and I also don't think, frankly, she was the best part of the movie. I feel like she saved it a lot, in my opinion, so I don't know. Like, one bad movie is generally not going to kill your career, especially when she's had more hits. Like, besides A Star Is Born, no one went to see House of Gucci, but from what I understand, she did a really good job in it,
Right.
And she's been in other stuff that I'm probably not even aware of, so she's going to be, I'm excited to see who she's going to be in Wednesday, because she'd be great in that show.
Well, and then somebody else we previously talked about who I believe was in Welcome to the Dollhouse, which I think was last year, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
According to this article from The Hollywood Reporter by Rick Porter, Heather Matarazzo will be will show up in a guest starring role. So good for her. I love her so much.
Well, we were talking about that last year, how it's like, because we brought up Princess Diaries already. Ooh, that's a good point. Matarazzo is probably going to have another big project as well, because Princess Diaries 3 is coming out.
Yes, that's right. They're doing... Okay, so there's 2 sequels that they're doing that for the first time ever. I'm not upset at them doing sequels. One of them is the Princess Diaries 3, which, yes, I hope they bring Lily back because she's so important to that story. And then 2 is going to be, they're doing The Devil Wears Prada 2, which that's such an iconic movie that I want to see what they're going to do with this, because the film kind of left that off on a very, this is where they're at, and this is where both, Meryl Streep's character's at, and I know her character's name. I don't know. Oh, Anne Hathaway's character is that. And it seems like their worlds are completely divided. It's like, so how are we going to do a second one? So I'm actually eager to see. This is like the first time I will not complain about there being sequels is for those 2 movies.
As I always say, justify their existence. That's usually for remakes, but sequels as well. Princess Diaries 3, I'm interested because of how long it's been. I'm kind of curious to see what's up with the royal family. You know, like, because she's been the queen probably at this point for, or maybe that's her next upgrade. She's becoming the queen. Whatever. Like, enough time has passed that's kind of inherently interesting just to see what's going on currently with her thing. I will admit, I never saw the Princess Diaries 2, but I know the gist of like what happened in the movie.
Well,
Maybe I'll watch it just in preparation for it. But that's great. That Matarazzo is getting some work, because that was something I feel like I must have remarked on during our review of Welcome to the Dollhouse. Is it's like, what's she been up to? Because we were talking about, like, she's in Princess Diaries. She turned down the sequel to Welcome to the Dollhouse that Greta Gerwig picked up. But then we were both kind of like, man, what's she been up to? So very happy to hear she's getting some work.
Well, and I mean, I know the second one diverted from the book series, but the Princess Diaries book series was at least 10 novels. So they have lots of material to work with, although you probably never read them. I'm just assuming based on your taste in books. They were a little crude when you think about how wholesome like the movies are. Also in the books, her dad's still alive. So that's a fun plot twist. He just has testicular cancer, and I guess they could say testicular cancer in a Disney movie.
Yes, with it being a Disney movie, they couldn't explain genitalia to the children.
Oh, that's right. He had to have one of his testicles removed. That's what it is. But he's still kind of like a playboy prince. It's bizarre. Anyway, but yeah, so we're excited for those. We're excited to see Lady Gaga join Wednesday. We're excited to see Heather Matarazzo join Wednesday, and hopefully she shows up in Princess Diaries 3. Now here's another one. Now this one you will probably have more of an interest in. So unfortunately, I can't read this article because I refuse to subscribe to Variety Premium, but I will.
Feel you.
We can go by the and kind of just discuss this just based on the article title. It says 2024 was a record year for A24 and Neon. 2025 will be tougher from them, and this is by Carrie Erickson. So from the first free paragraph, they basically talk about how A24 did, like gangbusters this year with Heretic, and because that was, I think according to this, they also shared that with Neon, and then they had Civil War, and then they had Neon's Long Legs, and they talk about how, before it fades out and ends, this was, a great year for independent films, sort of.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think I've talked about this before, but with A24 and with Neon, when people say independent, I kind of do put like a huge asterisk there, but I get what they mean. But they said, 2025 should be tougher because I guess they said that Hollywood's going to try to return to more of like their tentpole films, and their, what did it say in here? Independent distributors, they achieved record success. It says, we'll see these indies release many films as major studio slates bounce back with tentpoles and other auteur efforts. So what do you think? Do you think they're going to be able to hold their own against this? Especially, I mean, with tentpoles, I can kind of see them, because indie always has like its own special charm to it that's not in a tentpole film, so it always attract an audience. But when you pair that with the auteur films, which I like to call vanity projects, that was so shady.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I mean, it also depends. It depends on the director. It depends, because someone who wanted to hurt your feelings could say the same thing about Guillermo del Toro's.
He is a genius and he is a good person.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, if someone wanted to hurt your feelings, they could say, "Oh, you mean the Vanity Project Frankenstein?" Anyway, it depends on the filmmaker, depends on the project. I'm curious to see what the tentpole movies are, because this is somewhat related, somewhat not. Something we sort of commented on right at the... I don't know if we commented on it since in a recent episode, but in case we hadn't, at the beginning of summer, we were kind of talking about how there seemed to be a commentary in the film space that a lot of films were underperforming at the box office, and this was like around the time that Furiosa came out, and a bunch of people were saying like, "Oh, this is the death of Hollywood. This is the death of movie theaters. What's happening?" And in the time that happened, like since the summer was exploded with like Inside Out 2 is now the most highest grossing animated film of all time. Uh Alien Romulus, I think, is like the second highest grossing alien film of all time, and that includes like the original ones. So like no, actually, like the box office did quite well actually, like over the summer, and even
Right.
before that, I remember like it feels like 2 years ago at this point, but we started the year off with Dune 2, and that like surpassed the box office for the first film. It neared, I don't know if it ever hit it, but it was like getting close to $1 billion. Um, so, and that too, like it also echoes just when I was on YouTube, I was scrolling past like a video where it's like, why are all these 2024 movies bombing? And it was in the thumbnail, it was showing like Garfield and Megamind 2, and I was like, because those suck. What's your point?
Yeah.
So, uh, it was a really good year for Neon and for A24, and both of them, because Heretic like just came out. I actually forgot I might want to see that now that I think about it, because it looked really good. But like The Brutalist is coming out. Also, Nosferatu is not A24, and it's not Neon. I can't remember. I think it's like IFC or something did it. But that's another like independent, lower budget horror movie. So the year's not even over yet. We haven't gotten to Oscar bait yet. Like that stuff's starting to come out. Before we started recording, you and I were kind of talking about that. So yeah, I'm sure it will be harder for A24 Neon. Just I feel like it's going to be hard for everybody, like because the stakes are high. This year. It's going to probably be a big talking point of the finale this year. But like this was one of the, for a while I've been saying that 2019 was like the last really good movie year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've hit the next good movie year, because every genre, like action, horror, romance, just Hollywood blockbusters, stuff like Twisters,
right.
Which that's another one that also blew away the box office over the summer.
No pun intended.
There's just been so many good movies this year, and I haven't even been able to see all of them. So just in that sense, I'm curious what's coming out next year that's going to be impressive. But I'm sure there will be stuff. It's just, it's as far as like tentpole movies and stuff. I think the point I'm trying to get to when I was talking about how the death of cinema going into the summer is that you can't predict anything. Everyone was saying that like, the summer, all of the movies are going to bomb. Everything's going to suck. And then we had a bunch of records broken. So you can't predict it either way. If you were predicting based on past performance, like Furiosa should have outperformed Fury Road, but it didn't.
Right.
And same thing, like, it's been a while since an Alien film has done so well at the box office. I went into Alien Romulus over the summer, blank expectations. I was like, this might suck, this might be good. I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. Same thing with Twisters. I went into it mainly like, I knew it was something you and I would be able to talk about on the finale. But that's another one where I was genuinely surprised at how good it was. And these are things you can't predict. So when Variety vaguely talks about tentpole movies, what tentpole movies? Is Terminator 7 coming out next year? Like, what do you mean? There's a few I can guess about. Like, speaking of 20th Century Fox, I think the next Prey movie is coming out next year. And that might do really well. And especially because the first Prey wasn't even released to theaters, if I remember correctly. I just watched it on Hulu. And I think it was just straight to Hulu because at that time we were still dealing with the pandemic. So that's another one where we'll see how well it does, because it did really well when everyone was stuck at home. And it was like, oh, there's this cool new Predator movie that's like a period piece. But when you release it into a theater, will it perform as well as it did on streaming?
Right. Well, so what I'm hearing though overall is you do have high hopes for like you don't think there's going to be like an indie studio crash in the next coming
No.
year or anything like that, which is
I
good
think that's
because
kind of
we get lots of fresh ideas and weird stuff coming out of both those studios.
I just don't know where they get that because the reason I prop up A24 and Neon and all of these little guys is because they're smart business wise. Like I'm gonna use Blumhouse as an example, even though they're not really one of my favorites. They're never going to be unsuccessful because the way that they are successful is they Longlegs, for instance, had like $1 million budget. Like these movies do not cost a lot to make,
Right.
and that's what makes A24 and all of these so profitable. And oftentimes they're not even the ones producing it. I won't get into details, but I know a friend of mine who sometimes listens to the show just sold his film to A24. So A24 didn't produce his film, he produced it, but they bought it from him. So that's another thing. It's like, they're buying these in hopes to make a profit, and we'll see what happens. But generally, when they are the ones producing the films, they're not putting up a lot of money. So just this idea that there will somehow be like an indie studio crash just doesn't make logical sense.
Well, to be fair, I'm assuming that's what they meant because I didn't pay to read the whole article. But like when they said there's a concern though of will 2025 be as good for them as 2024 was. So we do like you said, we did see lots of forward progress with them. We saw them, like you said, it kind of explode, but not it. I don't think it was ever done in like an over production. I'm trying to say it wasn't like the streaming bubble sort of thing. So I think you're right. I think they'll be fine. My concern is that with there being maybe more general audience ready movies, it's kind of like going between couture and off the rack, with there being more off the rack movies that people know they're going to, like, for the most part, enjoy or know what's going on. Will they then spend their dollars on seeing the cool arty film? That's kind of what remains to be seen. But I do think they'll be doing fine. They're not going to do bad, but they may not do as well as this year. But we'll see what happens. So
yeah, and my thing, so anyone who listens to the show knows I like weirdo artsy movies. The other reason I argue, and I think I said this back when we talked about A24 doing some more mainstream projects, like they've got that Friday the 13th show that they're working on coming out at some point, but less about the serious artistic value of an A24 film. The reason I think that they do so well, and again, maybe these tentpole films will do well, maybe they won't, but again, you can't predict that. And a lot of the time, just even average moviegoers, like not film snobs, not film students, not art assholes, just general moviegoers like A24 Neon movies because they're different, not so much like they need their mind stimulated, but just a few minutes ago I made a joke about there being a Terminator 7. That's kind of why those films make a profit. Is it's like, do you want to see the same thing over and over again, or do you want to see a new idea?
Right. It's like
sometimes that's more pretentious than other times, but that's what makes those desirable to the movie going audience outside of art snobs.
I prefer the term art bros, but that being said, we're now going to pivot to the subject at hand. First off, whiskey. What are you drinking?
Well, I've been a bit on a health kick trying to avoid boozing it up too much. And since this film is set in a high school, I decided to pick a beverage that is high school appropriate. I know high school kids still drink underage, but, just grab myself a little Nesquik, some chalky milk.
Oh my God. We are on the same wavelength. Okay, so...
Oh man, what'd you get?
My school...
Capri Sun?
No. It's basically the same beverage, but I have a whole story I was going to tell you. My school, we did the I don't know if yours did the individual cartons of milk, and when I got to high school, they switched brands and they started, instead of doing, I think it was used to be Oak Farms, but then they started doing True Moo, chocolate milk, and it was
Ew.
like, I thought it was like the creamiest, dreamiest chocolate milk ever. So I went
Oh,
out
you
and
liked
got
the
a
True.
little, yeah, I got a little, half gallon or whatever it's called, the carton one, not the
I know
small
what you
one,
mean.
but the half carton of True Moo, just to relive it, because that was me. I used to get my pizza and my True Moo, and that was me. And I just got very excited about True Moo. Anyway, but yeah, I went and got some True Moo so I can relive my high school days. So I love that we're on the same wavelength, though, as far as this goes. Because I was like, there was no actual beverage that was mentioned unless it was just going to be generic whiskey. Because that's like the only other beverage I saw in the movie.
Yeah, well, like I know he drinks like something at that party kind of near the beginning, but I can't remember what it was. That's the thing. Like I've been trying to cut out the booze a little bit. In the last, I've been going to the gym more and stuff, so I'm like, oh, let's keep that going. I'll probably get back to something for the next movie. You've been cutting out the booze for numerous episodes this year. T's on a health bend.
No, I'm on a money saving bend.
That's true, I guess. Well, plus you always do cocktails, and that's always my rant I go on is like,
You're like,
if you buy, you got to get like 20 ingredients and you never use them for anything else.
well, see, that's the beauty of buying the little tiny bottles. Plus, according to
Yeah.
friends, if you hold them up, you look like a giant with like a little tiny bottle.
Plus, I'm sure you've seen this. I noticed this when I was out shopping for one of our past episodes. It might have been Valley of the Dolls too. But anyway, like they have like pre-made cocktails in these sort of like ball things. Like
Oh
these
yeah, those
orbs.
the orbs.
The orbs, the
I saw-
cocktail orbs.
I saw some soccer mom online be like, "How many of these does it take to get drunk?" I bought myself a breathalyzer and a bunch of orbs, and I was just like, "Girl, why are you doing this during the day in your house when your children are around? Like, please stop."
I know, right? That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, wow, my goodness, tell me you're an alcoholic without telling me you're not. But anyway, yeah, I almost got a Cosmo for that movie, and then I was like, nah, I could do better. And then I remembered the whole Sherry thing, and listen to the episode if you haven't. But yes, we are talking about Brick, the debut film of famed director Brian Johnson.
Oh
Or
god,
Ryan Johnson.
I know. When I saw his
so-
name at the end, I was like, "Oh."
And that's the other reason I picked this. So this is Noir November.
Yeah.
Asterisk if they come out by November. But so there's lots of examples of neo-noirs. Way back at the beginning of this show, you could have considered Memento neo-noir to some extent. Other famous examples would be things like Blade Runner, for instance. Chinatown you could kind of consider because that came out in the 70s, even though it's set in this typical time. But essentially, for anyone who listens to the show who isn't, into all the weird genres or whatever, film noir is essentially those old black and white detective movies. It's basically the type of movie that Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid was spoofing.
Yes.
And a neo-noir is when you have sort of a modern take on it, whether you set it in an odd time or maybe it's sort of a throwback. Like I mentioned Chinatown, that's also sort of a retro revival angle to it. What I picked this film for two reasons. The primary one is, as far as neo-noirs go, I feel like this is one of the most inventive takes I have ever seen. In fact,
I agree. I actually agree with that.
I did not see this for a long time because no one told me that angle of it. It was like, oh man, you gotta see Brick, man. And this was like kind of the snobby, I only watch indie movies people in my high school were saying, oh, Brick, it's amazing. I'm like, what's it about?
I keep
it's about,
forgetting.
Like, guy's girlfriend like gets killed in a drug deal gone bad. And it's like, I assumed it was one of those like crime dramas set in high school,
Yeah.
Like, just based on how it was described, when I finally saw this film, I was like, oh my god, this is such a cool idea. Because, like, it dawned on me, like, oh, he's, like, the hard-boiled detective. So anyway, like, I think that is just, like, the coolest idea for a neo-noir. And then the other reason is I have been increasingly aware of T's disdain for Ryan Johnson.
Oh, I'm sorry. He
He
completely and epically ruined the Star Wars franchise. because he thought he was cool and different anyway. But that's not today's
Well,
topic.
you could argue that that's Disney's fault for hiring him because, like, they said that in the Red Letter Media's review of that film, but like, if you know Rian Johnson's filmography up until that point, he's not someone you hire to make a safe sequel to a big franchise, and he did exactly. And that too, there were plenty of times they could have bailed out. He made it very clear what his plans were going into it, and you could even argue he made them a lot of money because those porgs, man, were like selling, like they still sell like crazy.
Oh my god!
But
I have like 5.
I'm aware, and we'll get into it as the review goes, but I know you really didn't like The Last Jedi. I am a Last Jedi apologist. I think you're out of your mind if you think it's the best Star Wars film, like some people were saying at the time. But I think that the ideas he had were good. I just think he needed some more time to
Well, he wrote the script.
Like he needed a few more passes on the screenplay.
Well, he wrote the script before he even saw the first one. So he basically took his script and tried to retcon it into anyway. We'll get to that later.
It was a mess. It was like there's that could be a whole episode in its time, the Disney trilogy, because
with Mary Poppins, Princess Leia. Like I don't know what he was on. Anyway. Okay,
but so it's not just that though. I've heard like because ever since that he has had a very successful career with his Knives Out franchise, and I have heard you groan when that gets brought up. So I have not seen Knives Out. I have not seen The Glass Onion, but I am curious what your thoughts will be on that. But I'm very happy to have returned to this. So let me just roll off some of the fun facts here so that we can get onto it. So Brick was made in it was released in 2005 to the festival crowd, but it's actual release date for us peasants was April 14th, 2006. And I was really surprised at like who picked it up because I forgot that Universal Studios was like the distributor. So wow, crazy good that he got that. Focus Features was, the indie studio that picked it up. Like it was pretty much like when you see the film, those are the two Focus Features, Universal Studios. But the production company that actually produced the film was Bergman Lustig Productions. The budget was under $1 million, estimated at $475,000, but it had a worldwide gross of $3.5 million, so very good for writer-director Rian Johnson. Fun fact, he was inspired by spaghetti westerns and the anime Cowboy Bebop for the visualization of the film. And Cowboy Bebop makes a lot of sense. I'll get more into that when we talk about how the film looks. The main cast, I decided to list everybody because the characters were actually super good, and even like bit players. Like I'm not listing the entire cast, but like pretty much the core cast I think were very important. Of course, starring we got Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who is buddies with Rian Johnson and ended up starring in his follow-up film Looper. Well, I guess Looper was his third film. Whatever. Like, he's buddies with Rian Johnson. Emily de Ravine plays Emily. Nora Zehetner is Laura. We've got Matt O'Leary as the brain. We've got Lucas Haas as the pin. We've got Megan Good as Kara. We've got Noah Fleiss as Tugger, the funniest name in the movie. We've got Noah Segan as Dode. We've got Richard Roundtree as Assistant VP Truman. And we've got Brian White as Brad Bramish. So, and I'll go into,
What about the pin's mother? You're not going to list the pin's mother? She was like the best role.
She was pretty funny. But no, I just she was only in like 10 seconds in the movie. So, like, this is the film, as I said, this was being talked about. I was hearing about it in, like, 2007, 2008, so a little bit after this came out. But it made a splash. Like, everyone was talking about Rian Johnson when this came out, and that really is reflected in the awards that this film won. It was nominated for a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, like, all of the film critics associations were raving about this. And so at the Sitges Catalonian International Film Festival. It won the Citizen Kane Award for Best Directorial Revelation to Rian Johnson. The Chicago Film Critics Association Awards. It won Most Promising Director, Cognac Festival de Film Policier. It won the New Blood Award for Rian Johnson. Sundance Film Festival of 2005. It won the Special Jury Prize. The Austin Film Critics Association. It won Best First Film for Rian Johnson. The San Francisco Film Critics Circle. It won Best Original Screenplay for Rian Johnson. So it's all like critics associations, and pretty much every award that it won was nominated and awarded to Rian Johnson. So like he was the face of this movie. And this is why, again, I understand why he got the job for Star Wars, and also because this is also like he made movies after this before Star Wars, and they were also critically acclaimed. But I also, again, this is also why you don't hire him to do Star Wars. Oh, and also, a fun fact. So he is from San Clemente, California, where the film is shot. And I didn't get this in my research this time, but I remember watching a thing way back. That is, like, it's shot at his high school. He graduated from that high school, went off to film school, and then during summer vacation, he shot the whole movie at his high school. So that's where the film is set.
Okay.
But what did you think, T?
So I would like to preface this by saying that my opinions were formed before I found out Rian Johnson was involved in this movie. So I would not like that to be used to discredit this. So I thought it was cute. I thought the overall story was interesting. I had a lot of trouble, though, understanding what was going on, because the constant, just I call it overuse of just like old school PI jargon and talking and everything, which I get it, it's a style thing. I couldn't understand what it was half the time. I had to keep the Wikipedia page up so I could follow along with what was going on. I mean, I could get the general, okay, this person, but I couldn't get, all the details that tied everything together. And I'm still not sure I totally understand what ties everything together at the end. I could just be stupid. That's just me. But right now, before we have our discussion, I am, though, kind of putting it in what I refer to as the gimmick basket, which is where I put movies like The Artist in. Like the thing that made it cool, I think, was the speech and the way everything was talking. Otherwise, it's kind of just sort of it's an enjoyable, detective story, but nothing really to write home about. That was kind of just my take on it. That being said, I did think the characters were interesting. I do think it was very well acted. And I almost wanted to comment that, it's classified as like a mystery / neo-noir. They really should have put / comedy, because it's like so ridiculous how they're talking and the things they're doing, that this is really, like, I really do think it should also be classified as a comedy. And I think it was also meant to be sort of as a comedy too.
It definitely is.
But it's like not
as a whole, but like there are funny moments in the movie, a lot of them actually, and that's what I'm saying. It's not like funny here or there. It was like there was so much of it, and like I said, even the fact that of how they're talking about everything, and like they're using this old school lingo, and they're all sounding super intense about everything. I mean, it is an intense situation, but they're talking like it's 1945 and the war just ended. So I was like, this has to be a parody or something. And I almost would say, and I know you disagree with me, that it's almost a parody sort of sort of the hard-boiled PI genre of noir films. But that was kind of like my overall take with it. Like, I thought I would definitely watch this again. It was an enjoyable detective story. I don't get what the excess praise is. So we know you don't like his Star Wars movie, but I have definitely heard you groan whenever I bring up Knives Out, and I haven't seen it. So Glass Onion, Knives Out, why are you still groaning when you hear about Rian Johnson? And why do you need to clarify that if you had known he was involved in this, you probably would have thought differently?
Well, okay. So No, I basically what I was trying to say was I want my thoughts separated from the fact that I dislike Ryan Johnson. This is basically going to
But
become
why?
the
My
show where
question is,
T
why do you
dislikes
dislike Ryan
directors.
Johnson?
Okay, so first off, Star Wars, enough said. But besides that, his other big tentpole sort of movie, I haven't seen any sort of like the other, films in his repertoire, but he seems to really kind of hone in on this mystery crime section. We saw that here. We even kind of saw that in Star Wars. Like,
So
if I
you
were,
haven't seen Knives Out yet?
I
either.
have,
Like you haven't seen.
I have,
Okay.
I've seen Knives Out and I've seen Glass Onion, and he also did sort of this crime sort of thing in Star Wars. So I think there was even like a heist in that movie. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is, he seems to really hone in on this, but his Knives Out movie that everybody went nuts for, it's not a good whodunit. And people are like, yeah, but it's such a twist. You don't see the ending. And I'm like, yeah, but keep in mind, a movie's meant to be viewed more than once. And I need something more. And this has kind of been a consistent sort of problem with whodunits, is they don't have a long shelf life because a lot of the tension and interest in the movie is based on not knowing. And there's other whodunits like the ones off the top of my head, Clue, and what was there's one I saw just fairly recently. We talked about it. See Them Run, that were also whodunits, but were better because the movie relied on more than just the tension of not knowing. And I feel like a lot of Knives Out relies on you just not knowing who the killer is. And it's like once you figured out, like I tried to rewatch it and I was kind of just bored because there's nothing really of interest keeping me in. So that's why I say it's better. Now, Glass Onion is better, and I think the reason why Glass Onion is better is because, well, I don't know if I can tell you this. Am I allowed to talk about the ending of the movie at all?
Well, I know one thing that sounds pretty great. Yeah, I know there's a tech bro character that is really funny and clearly based on like, and I think I know the ending. I think he's the one who did it. And it's like I just know everyone was saying that like that character was like the funniest thing ever, and that he kind of made. I feel like Glass Onion was hit or miss for people, but the people who liked it because of that character. And from what I've heard about that character, he sounds like funny to me. I probably would be
because
he's funny and I like this movie camp.
Well, I see I first off think the characters are more interesting in Glass Onion, but that character who is so central to the entire story, he is kind of a what's the word? A caricature of a very controversial figure in time even right now, depending on who you talk to. And it was very interesting to see somebody write somebody that way and go like straight for the throat with his depiction. Now, if you talk to Ryan Johnson now, he claims he didn't base it on that person. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, and I know the person.
I was just like, I was just like,
he's
okay,
probably
dude, just own it. Just say face. Like,
he probably doesn't want to get sued. To be honest, I kind of have a feeling he's probably just like, it's based on him, but I don't want to.
Right.
I don't want to get in trouble with a billionaire who could freaking have me chopped up and thrown into the.
Well, and I don't just something about the Glass Onion story was also just a bit more timeless too.
Okay.
So
the Glass you Onion, hate him for.
The Glass Onion was better. Knives Out, I just don't think he's good at writing whodunits. I think that's where, like I said, based on this movie and the Star Wars movie that I've seen of him, crime or mystery is kind of where his heart is, and the fact he developed a Knives Out series and everything. And I just did not think he was good at writing. He got better in the second one, but again, it's almost like anyway. But he got better at the second one. It still wasn't fabulous, but it was enjoyable. But the first one, like I said, is not a good whodunit. And so that's kind of why I kind of grow when people say, oh, but Knives Out. I'm like, yeah, but then I always ask people, but when was really the last time you watched Knives Out? And in my experience, I find a lot of people who are writing the praise so high, it's like, oh, well, I saw it in the theater when it came out. And I'm like, try watching it again. And it's like all the tension and interest kind of evaporates because you know what it is. And it's like, you really don't like any of the people or care about them at all. So you're kind of just like, about the rest of the story. And I think that's what makes a good whodunit different from a bad whodunit, is a good whodunit has more there for you than, what, like, a good one that came out fairly recently, like last year, was A Haunting in Venice. I know some people didn't.
Yep.
Some people thought it was kind of boring. I thought it was really good because it's one that I've watched again and again, because I'm watching it for more than just to find out who the killer is and why they did what they did and what convoluted plan happened. Like the atmosphere, the lighting, the characters, everybody is so good in that, and you kind of just get wrapped up in it very well. So that's kind of like my thing. That's why, if you wanted to ask why I groan, that is my very long explanation as to why I groan.
Well, I got you.
People
It
bring up
sounds like
Knives Out.
mainly you just. Well, it sounds like mainly you just don't like a Star Wars thing, and like
That
Knives
is
Out,
not what
so
I
much.
said. That is not what I said. I said he's not good at
No,
writing.
you explained the
whodunits.
whodunit, and I also get what you mean about the whodunit thing, because bringing up Haunting in Venice, that filmmaker's first film in that series, what is it, like Orient Express?
Yeah, Murder in the Orient
I
Express.
know the end. I know the ending to that one. Like it's a famous ending, so that's part of the reason I never got into the new remakes, you could argue, of that series. You know, the Death on the, and I heard Death on the Nile sucked. What anyway?
Yeah, I didn't like Death on the Nile.
But Orient Express I avoided because I knew the ending, because it was famous, because it's been made like 2 previous times. So I get what you mean about whodunits, and the one time I will say that it can work, knowing the killer, is sometimes it's fun to go back and like rewatch scenes, and you might pick up some of their behaviors or something they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, so that's where it can work. So no, I was listening. I know what you mean, but it sounds like you don't like hate his Knives Out movies as much as, like, it's mainly Star Wars. And I agree with you. Something like, I wouldn't even say crime. He kind of has this old world flair to his movies. Another film that he did that have you seen Looper?
I have not seen. Is that the one that was adapted from a play?
No,
Okay.
but it's a time travel movie that involves gangsters sending people back in time to get you need to get someone whacked. So you kidnap them and send them back in time and have someone in the past kill them, because in the future they can track people and work. So if you send them to the past, they just disappear. So it's like this gangster movie, you know, and it's got this whole other story to it, but it's like got this sci-fi twist to it. Like, the thing that Rian Johnson excels at, to me, is he is very good at coming up with like clever ideas that make his movies more interesting than they actually are. Like, I think story-wise, like, he can make a really solid story. Like, Looper is probably... Oh, it's interesting. I'm glad I went back and watched this for this show, because this might arguably be his best film, to be honest. But with this and with Looper, the story is very, very simple, but that also makes it like really rock solid. So when you add these sort of, you know, gimmicky sort of elements to it, it doesn't feel like it's relying on the gimmick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The same way where, like, Looper, it's not like... And the other thing with Looper that was, like, fun was that it was Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And so they were both playing the same character. Basically, like, in that movie, when you send someone... When your contract is over, your future self gets sent back and you kill yourself, essentially. And that's where the movie starts, is, like... His future self escapes, and then he's in trouble, and he's got to go kill his future self. But that was the other kind of gimmick, was it's like, ooh, they're both playing the same character, and he's kind of wearing, like, prosthetics to look like Bruce Willis. Right. And it was, like, this whole thing. But it didn't rely on the gimmick. Like, it did have, like, a solid story that it was telling. And that's sort of the same thing with Brick. And the other thing, I do know, I'm not going to fault you for being tripped up by the dialogue, but the thing I like about the dialogue... It's not actually 1940s talk. He invented his own lingo for the movie. You know, it sounds like old-timey detective.
Oh, that's
kind of
interesting.
talk, because that's what... So, like, you know, for instance, oh my gosh, I just had this in my head while you were talking earlier. But, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on this? But yeah, like, he hopefully I'll remember in a second, but yeah, he came up with terms like, oh, here, I remembered. So, for instance, who's she eating with?
Yeah.
this is like, that was kind of a neat little thing. It's, like, it's not like, oh, what clique are you hanging with? What are who are you eating with? It's one of those things that's like very social in grade school and high school.
Right.
Like,
So
who you are socially involved with, you eat lunch with them. So
right.
it's just like a thing. It sounds like something an older person would say. It sounds like something, but there's no detective movie where it's like, who's she eating with? You know what I mean? So like in that way, I feel like he was really clever with the dialogue because he made it sound like it was from an era, but without like, just aping terms from that period of time. He just
Right.
like came up with his own like high school lingo. Like, okay, how would they say this and sound like they're like 40 years old rather than.
So
And I also think that's kind of
that's
made the
super
movie age
interesting.
better.
I
Yeah.
think that makes that super interesting because it's you kind of really have to study sort of in a way the social hierarchy and aspects of you of a high school youth to really kind of like hit on something that you can kind of base a whole new language on that if you listen, as you said, which apparently I wasn't.
I mean, it might be a good reason
getting
to, check this out a second time. Again, like, because you didn't know that. So now if you go back and, like, listen to the dialogue, you'll be able to kind of dissect it a little bit more.
Like even if
and
it
that's
wasn't,
like the fun thing, too, because it tricks your brain into feeling like it's old-timey talk. Like, I actually watched it with subtitles on, so I was, like, reading it as I was going, and sure enough, yeah, it's, like, it's weird, because it's not words that, like, people wouldn't say in 2005, it's just...
it's structured and spoken in a way that would evoke that sort of this is obviously how PIs talked, even though, like you said, it was a completely like made up, like I'd almost say language that you kind of have to learn.
Yeah, I mean, like, so opening this episode of the show, I even kind of parodied one of my favorite lines where he's almost going to get jumped by these druggies in the alleyway or whatever behind the school. And again, it's like the way he's talking, he sounds like Sam Spade or something, but like,
right.
Back off, hash head. I have all 5 of my senses, plus I slept last night, which means I have 6 up on you. It's like, it's funny, but it's
crazy.
It's like such a good line, but it's also like, again, he's not saying anything that's anachronistic. It's just something, it's the way he says it. It's also like kind of the wittiness of that. Like, oh, you're so brain dead from smoking weed all the time that like just me having my 5 senses gives me 5 up on you. It's good. It's I really like the dialogue. It might trip you up if you're not expecting it. And there's definitely like one thing going on this time. It's been over a decade since I've seen this film. So when they were talking about the pin at the very beginning, I didn't know what they were talking about until like, a third to halfway through where it's like, oh, there needs to be a pin, a kingpin. And I'm like, oh, that's what they meant.
Okay. So I feel better now because I picked up on that. I was like, oh, obviously.
And there's...
Well, actually, in my head, I was thinking linchpin, but same my principle.
Right? Yeah, no, well, and they even say Kingpin. And that's like another kind of thing I thought was neat is like, so they're all in high school, right? So the Kingpin, at one point he's talking to the brain, he's like, oh, he's an old man, he's 26. And it's funny because it's like, oh yeah, that is an old man to a high schooler. And then
wait,
when you meet the Kingpin,
was 20.
he looks...
The brain was 26?
No, not the brain, the Kingpin.
Oh, okay. Oh,
the Kingpin, the drug dealer.
That's more disturbing. His mother's still making him milk and cookies.
But that's why it's funny. Again,
I know, but
because he's... It's also like, again, this is real to how... Because drug dealers who sell to high school kids are like townies and burnouts who still live with their mother in their mid-20s. So like it's real to the actual real world. Like this is the kind of person who would be running a gang with teenagers. But the way they make him look and stuff, he looks like a villain from like a 40s detective story. He's got a cane, and they explain this like he's like crippled or whatever. But and again, he lives in his mom's basement. But then the basement looks kind of like a
it looks like a 70s office. Apartment. Oh, yeah, that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just that you could argue that this film is style over substance, but there's just like a cleverness to it again, where this is essentially that movie I didn't want to see when people were explaining it to me when I was in high school.
Yeah.
But the style is what makes it interesting. The reason I didn't want to see it when I was like 16 or whatever is because it sounded like every other, oh, okay, so, you know, he's going to infiltrate the gangsters on the streets and they're going to, you know, and they're, oh, man, you don't know my life. You don't know, you know, I just assumed it was going to be one of those kind of stupid dramas.
What was that accent you just did?
It's the comic relief of our podcast. No, but it's interesting, right? Because this is in essence the same movie I was avoiding watching, but because of the stylistic choices, it makes it kind of stand out more.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's like a cleverness to how he puts it together, like with the Kingpin. Like this is a character who in a different movie would just be like, you know, a sweaty nerd living in his mom's basement, and there would be nothing like intimidating about him other than the fact he's much older than these kids. But and that too, I also like how it reminds me of like a drug kingpin in a 40s detective movie having like a limousine where he's got that crappy van and he has set up like a leather couch with like a lamp with a lampshade in it. Mm-hmm. You know, and he's still and he's kind of chosen like a falcon is like his symbol. It's on his mailbox, it's on his cane, it's in the you know, his limousine, you could say.
Yeah.
It's on
his mailbox.
So, like, exactly. Oh, and that too. I also love like he it's the house with the tacky mailbox when he does that.
Immediately taken over.
Yeah, so like that is essentially I made a note here of things that I thought were inventive, and we've already gone over the dialogue and the concept visually. So we're going to go back to what I said earlier, the fun fact.
I'm curious about where you're going to go with this visual thing, because I know you said he was inspired by, you know, anime and specifically Cowboy Bebop. I'm very interested in this because to me it just sort of looked like every other movie made from that time period. Visually, I mean. That was supposed to be kind of a hard-hitting drama.
And here we go. Here's Whiskey talking about cinematography again. Here he goes.
Favorite topic.
No, but well, so it's funny. I did not know that fun fact until researching for this episode. But one thing that did stand out to me in my memory of this film, and also something that felt different from other Rian Johnson films, is that this one felt kind of cartoony. You know, there's like some very wacky, slapsticky sort of things that stood out to me in this film. And technically, I mean, when I had seen this, I'd not seen any other Rian Johnson films. Because at the time, I believe Brothers Bloom was the only thing that he had made since. Looper had not come out at that point. But I just remembered, like, on top of it being, like, a cool take on, like, a detective film, like, I just remember it feeling like a live-action cartoon in moments. So something I was looking forward to rewatching it was keeping that in mind, like, why did I think that way? And there's a couple of things that stand out. Part of it is the stylistic choices I was just, you know, gushing about, because there is something cartoony about that 26-year-old guy looking the way he did. But there's also, like, visual sequences that made the whole Cowboy Bebop thing stand up. One in particular, if you remember when he is trying to get Tug to take him to the pin, you know, there's the bit where Tug is, like, driving his car at him.
Uh-huh.
And there's sort of a very, like, cartoony sort of way that it's edited and cut together in the shots where you just see him, like, inches away from him, like nearly hit him, like, and miss. And especially this time watching, I was like, oh, whoa, that looks like something out of an anime. So it's funny that,
I can see that.
Once I saw that, I was... And that's probably where that was coming from. And even also just the way Tug roughed him up felt very, like, out of a cartoon. Same thing with Brendan's fight with Brad Bramish. Like, that felt it felt like something out of Popeye, where it's like, oh, he's, you know, challenging the jock to a fist fight, and they're both just, like, wailing on each other. And, like, there was just something very, like, cartoony about that.
It was very, let me get my katana out. Like, it was like top 10 anime fights. I deflected him with my briefcase, you know, those whole things.
And then there were other like elements of humor. You mentioned this when you were kind of talking about your initial thoughts on the film, but there is a lot of humor in this. Another one that I thought was very funny and actually didn't remember is when he's talking to Kara, the theater girl. There's that moment where that freshman lifts his head up and then runs
his
off.
lapdog.
Yeah, and then it happens later in the film, but it's like, was he just performing cunnilingus or like what was that? You know, and I don't know if that was the implication they were going for, but like that was really funny. And there's a lot of that in this, and that is something that kind of carries on in some of his other films. This one, it's more pronounced.
Yeah.
And it was something that stuck with me when I was remembering this film. But there, like, speaking of the Star Wars movie you hate, there's a scene a lot of people didn't like at the very beginning where there's kind of a comedic scene where BB-8 is like plugging up electric things on the X-Wing, and people were like mentioning it kind of looked like a Looney Tunes cartoon or whatever, but it's like, I mean, hey, that kind of reminds me of some of the cartoony stuff from this film. And then there's some other things in Looper as well where it's a serious film. There's some actually very disturbing imagery in that film, and even the concept is really kind of scary, you know, like gangsters sending people back in time to immediately die. But there was like some very silly slapstick. There's sort of a character who's actually played by the same actor who plays Dode in this film, and he's just sort of like a fuck up, for lack of a better word. And for the whole thing in Looper, like it's just him messing up over and over again and like embarrassing himself, and there's sort of a comedic element in that. But yeah, like the whole Cowboy Bebop thing made a lot of sense. Like the car scene I was talking about is like the biggest example I can think of. If I went through the whole movie, I could probably think of more. But and that too, even just like, you know, I went on about the pin. Let's talk about Tug, and let's talk about his costume. My God, like
what was that? I was like, is he trying to look like Shawn Mendes? Like, is that what he's going for? Speaking of that too,
that's the other thing. I don't know if you noticed this. Speaking of cartoon kind of things about this movie, none of the characters change. The only character who really changes costume is Kara, because every time Brendan goes to talk to her, it's a different play going on, and she's got a different costume on. But other than her, all of the characters wear the same clothes. Brendan is always wearing, you know, the same tan jacket, jeans, and like dress shoes. The Brain is always wearing his thing. You've got Tug wearing his white beanie and wife beater with the jeans. You've got the jock who's literally just wearing his Letterman jacket everywhere. And then you've got Dode, who he made look like a greaser, and he's always wearing his leather jacket, and he's got his greasy hair. Mm-hmm. So, like, they're even kind of cartoon characters in and of themselves. Like, they are always wearing the same clothes, just like a cartoon character does. And they're also very, like, one note, which you could say makes them very one-dimensional, but it does also make them very memorable. Despite me listing off, like, 10 different people, anyone who's seen this movie, like, you know, when I say Laura, you're like, oh yeah, the girl who was like wearing the kimono and she sang the piano song and she's totally hot for Brendan, but he doesn't trust her. If I say Brain, you know, oh yeah, the guy with glasses, you can solve a Rubik's Cube. Like, they're very one note, but they're also very memorable.
Well, but I mean, as far as one note goes, that's kind of more of a product of the genre as opposed to a product of the writing.
Yes.
But you know what's interesting? Really quick, because you talked about visuals, I will say there was one scene in here that looked painfully bad. And it was during when he takes him to see the pin. It's like every so often he would pop his head out, and they would do an exterior shot of him looking out of the car, and it was so painfully obvious the car was not moving and was in park. And I was like, stop showing this scene. Because there was the stylized of him driving, which, you know, especially first I complained about, but when you explained it was supposed to be stylized like an anime, okay, I can kind of see that. But whenever Joseph Gordon-Levitt would look out of the trunk while he's driving to take in his surroundings, it was so obvious the car wasn't moving. I'm like, oh my god, y'all, why? Don't show that more than once. And I think they showed it like 3 times. But that was kind of a small gripe. But I thought that was funny.
Yeah. And there's like, that's the other thing that I found really impressive. Like, this is one of those movies Guillermo del Toro did this with Kronos, and there's like other bits of like directors doing this where they pool together all the resources they can to get like their feature made. I don't know if you noticed this in the credits, but a lot of the people were his family. His brother was the composer for the music. His parents were listed as producers and stuff. So I there's some amateurish mistakes like that for sure, because it's like, how much would it cost to just get the tow truck to move the car while he's
right.
in the trunk. But that's like something that's so impressive. And same thing, like whatever featurette I watched years ago when I was kind of into seeing like how this was made or whatever, it is crazy to see like what he was able to accomplish, because this does look cinematic despite him doing it on such a shoestring budget. Even in 2005, doing it for less than $1,000 or less than $1 million is really crazy.
Yeah, I can see that.
And for it to look as stylized as it does, like when you think of indie movies from this period of time, they don't look this good. Like,
That's
and
true,
when they do, they're also just vapid. Like, I recently rewatched Garden State, which was like another 2000s indie darling, and that's another one where it looks really damn good for what it is. Although that one had the benefit of the director being a regular on a major network sitcom. Brian Johnson, or why do I keep calling it Ryan Johnson, was a nobody.
Because nobody in their
probably
right
like
name
in his early 20s when he made this.
Yeah, I can see it, but like you said, it still looked really good, really polishedly put together. Like, and I said, the only reason that probably if there had been a lot more amateurish mistakes, that probably wouldn't, a scene I just discussed, probably wouldn't have stuck out as much, because the rest of it is just so polished and so well done. And I will say his color grading was excellent.
Yes. And, you often complain about, I talk about good cinematography being like, creative, not just like flat angles or whatever. And you often will like complain about it being overly like moody or like trying to be really, like a classic example of a classic film is Scorsese's Taxi Driver, with the dollying away from him talking on the phone.
God, I hate that scene.
One thing I will say about this is it definitely does call attention to itself, but it does it for entertainment value. Like it never tries to be like, we're anti-pretentious on this show. None of the creative decisions feel pretentious. They feel like they're trying to be flashy, sure, but like it feels like they're trying to make you engaged with what's going on. Well, and again, with how simple this story is, I feel like in the hands of a different director, this movie could have been really boring.
I will say, I will argue that the coming up with their own language and studying the structure and style of 1940s dialogue to make this, I would argue, is a little pretentious. Like the fact that I have to go back and rewatch it just to understand what was being said, even though they were speaking English, is weird to me. Well, pretentious would be like him thinking that he's being smart by doing that. Again, like to me, this feels more like what's an interesting take on a noir film, Well, what I thought was interesting about this? I thought this was like so unserious until that scene where who was it? I think Tug shoots Dode, and I'm like, oh, okay, this just got real.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was kind of just like, I almost kind of thought at first this was going to be a bunch of petty high school drama, like that they are taking so seriously. And I was like, please. And then I'm like, oh, this is for real. There are consequences. Which to me kind of opens...
I mean, you're dealing with a brick of heroin, too, so it's like and also, I mean, technically you start off with a dead girl in a drainage ditch, so like...
Which, okay, I hated that because I was like, how did he get away with not being involved in this crime at all when he moved the body? That's like at least considered desecration of a corpse.
Because Tug's a hothead and he was able to just lay it on him. I mean... Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, because that's another thing, going back to this, as I said, I remembered that it was very cartoony, so I was kind of curious, like, is this going to be, like, tonal whiplash? Because, I remember the movie. So, like, is it gonna feel off when we have like a dead girl and it goes from that to like anime shots and stuff like that?
Yeah.
But again, like it didn't feel, again, pretentious is I did this because I'm smarter than everybody. To me, it felt more like, for instance, why did he do what he did with Star Wars, right? Like he wanted to do something different. He wanted to go left when everyone's going right.
I think he
Like,
was
and
trying to
maybe
make a
there's
pretentious Star Wars
pretentiousness
movie.
to that, but
Yeah.
I feel like he's trying to tell something, like tell a story in a memorable way, rather than it being like about showing off or like him about being smarter than other people. Like this just felt like, as I said, if this had been done without being kind of gimmicky, it would have been a boring, forgettable movie. You know what I mean?
So you're kind of saying that the gimmick, I guess, which you kind of, it sounds like you do agree it is a gimmick, but the gimmick was necessary.
It is a necessary. Well, because again, if you take away all of the things that are gimmicky about it, what do you have? You have the movie I was making fun of when I.
That's true.
Said I didn't want to see. When people were raving about this movie, and all they said was like, "Oh, it's about a drug dealer." And
why on earth would that be what you come
like,
back with? I'm just like, if I saw this movie, the first time I'd be like, "Oh my god, they're talking like it's 1942." Like that's what you need to see it for.
Right?
The story would be like.
Again, I'm happy no one told me that, because it made me really invested when I saw it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
The fact I went into it just being like, okay, everyone's raving about this movie 3 years ago when I was in high school. I should probably finally watch it. And then when I watch it, I'm like, is this like a gangster? Why are they? Oh my god, is this like a film noir? What is this? Like, it got me invested, and obviously I had to pay closer attention because of the way they were talking and stuff. But I think that also is sort of why people were raving about this when it came out in 2006, because let's say you're just some dude going to Sundance and you walk into this film, and frankly the title doesn't sound very interesting either. Brick.
I know. I kind of think they should have called it.
What it reminded me of? You know what it reminded me of before I saw it? It reminded me of Crash. That movie that shouldn't have won Best Picture, that made everyone angry. That was just like a very generic drama. That's what I thought of when I thought of Brick. So I was just pleasantly surprised when I saw this very like inventive, cute little like detective movie set in a high school. Because that's the thing. Like, if Rian Johnson thinks he's smart for any of these decisions, or like smarter than the audience, then he is pretentious. But at least to me, it doesn't feel like he's coming off that way. It feels like he is trying to be entertaining and memorable, not that he's trying to like think that he's better than you for having seen Bugsy Malone movies.
So I guess what you're trying to say is, even if it comes across as pretentious, that wasn't the intent, and that's really what we need to focus on here.
Yes.
Okay.
And since I've been so positive, I will say there is one downside, and there's one thing I think that it had to do, but it also weakens the movie a little bit. So we haven't really talked about like genre trappings, genre things that I love how I'm forgetting words, but pretty much like conventions of the genre of film noir.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about it all the time. Like I'm always yapping on about slasher films and all this other stuff, but just like any other genre, film noir sort of has its own things that you come to expect of it. And this film is very predictable if you've seen any classic film noir. Because there's a lot of things that you expect from it that happen in this movie in a very predictable kind of way. And the problem is that if he made it less, like if he decided not to have those things in the movie, I don't think it would have been clear that this was an attempt at like a neo-noir. But at the same time, if you've seen any of those old movies, you know where this is going to go. And the big obvious example is the ending, in which it turns out Laura was the mastermind behind everything. She was the one who stole the brick and cut it bad, and because she was afraid she was going to get caught, She laid everything on Emily, which is what got her murdered, and then post that she's been kind of trying to manipulate Brendan and stuff. Like, that whole ending is literally the Maltese Falcon. And it doesn't make it bad, but it's very predictable. And if you know what the kind of movie this is trying to be, the entire time, you're like, she did it. From the very second you see her singing on the piano, you're like, it's her. She did it. Because that's how all those old movies, like, the type of character archetype that she is, if you are not familiar with film noir, is called a femme fatale.
Yes, I do know that one.
Exactly. And like Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a parody of a femme fatale. And in that film, she is a red herring. You're supposed to think, oh, well, she looks kind of... There's literally the line, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. But her whole character is based on this 1940s archetype of a woman playing the detective for a sap and actually being the one behind everything.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it doesn't ruin the movie. If anything, it kind of makes it. Because here's a question: Did you guess that's where that was going to go, T?
I don't think I guessed, mostly because I wasn't quite sure what her thing is, but I didn't like her from the beginning. So if it hadn't seemed like the movie had wrapped up and it seemed like to me there were still missing pieces, I would have been like, yeah. But like you said, I don't know. So you understand why that has to be there. I mean, I guess it's the end of the movie. You kind of already know what the genre of the film is supposed to be. So to me, it was kind of like, somebody used this metaphor recently. It was like cheese on top of cheese. It's like,
yeah,
it's like, I think they could have left the ending alone or done it some other way or something like that without having that ending, because the ending, I think, is kind of the main trapping that kind of makes me think, okay, the story's not that great. Without, like, we talk about all the stylistic stuff and anything like that. Like, I will be honest, I didn't guess that, but I also wasn't exactly sure what her character even was in relation to everybody else. I mean, I was suspicious of her because he said, I don't trust you. And then I'm like, okay, then why are we always hanging out with her? Like, I didn't like nothing about her, the way that she was styled and looked until basically the end gave me femme fatale vibes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, the final twist and yeah, it was just, it was a lot. If we could have just let it, and he never really seemed like attracted to her at all in the movie. Maybe I missed something, but
he's not. Well, and you don't have to be attracted to the femme fatale for, like, it's just.
Because I thought, like, her whole goal was she leads him. She's supposed to be like the temptress almost.
Yeah. Well, like, I brought up the Maltese Falcon. It's been a while since I've seen that, but I don't think Sam Spade ever has, like, I don't even think he kisses her. Like, I know at the very end of the movie, he's like, so long, babe. Like, you know, like, I know it was you. The police are going to take you away. It could have been different. Or, you know, he says something along those lines, but I don't think that he ever really has, like, a romantic moment with her. It's just sort of, I feel like, you know what it might be? It might be men in the 40s were so sexist that they thought women couldn't commit crimes. So it was like a big, oh my God, really? It was the woman the whole time? Who knows? But there was like it's also, it's been such a long time since I first saw this that I can't remember if I suspected it when I first saw it. But if I did, I think what would have clued me in mainly was, just like Jessica Rabbit, how she looks. Because she's, like, even in that opening scene, she's wearing, like, a kimono, and she's, like, very sultry, and she's singing that piano song. The fact that she is throwing herself at Brendan, because you're right, he's not attracted to her. He's very stoic in, like, I'm going to find out why well, at that point, he's like, where is my ex-girlfriend? And then later on, who killed my ex-girlfriend? But the fact she's throwing herself at him, and also the fact that he is not trusting her for the duration of the movie. He never gives her any info because he does not trust her.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of clues you in, like, you know, obviously, oh, maybe he's being overly paranoid. Even the brain is like, bro, I think she's on our side. But that also is kind of like, the hard-boiled detective thing. Other sort of stuff on like the clever aspect of it that just kind of occurred to me while we were talking about this, like in the femme fatale and stuff. One, I haven't mentioned him yet, but Assistant VP Truman, I thought that was kind of clever, making the school administration basically like the cops.
Right, like he's like the
I thought that
commissioner.
exactly, and I liked that whole angle too, where it's like, because it's like, how is this kid a detective? And I like that there is this backstory of he ratted out one of Emily's previous drug dealer boyfriends, and so like he's almost like a snitch for the cops
Right.
in quotation marks. But that also kind of gives him like, no one wants to talk to him out there because they don't know if he's going to rat on them. And that also gives him sort of a he's almost being forced to do this stuff by the in fact, that's like the whole scene with the assistant VP, which that's also another funny thing. Assistant vice principal, so you're not even the vice principal, you're like the assistant to the vice principal. But yeah, there was that whole thing where it's like, someone's going down for this, and if we can't find out who it is, it's going to be you. That's like a very turn in your badge kind of thing. And then Brendan is a character. It's funny, we haven't talked
That
very
whole
much
scene
about
that whole scene. Speaking of Brendan, that you just talked about, I'm kind of just like, oh, are we gonna have like a whole series of mysteries like about Brendan? Like, okay, I don't know if you remember. Okay, did you have? I forget if we've talked about this. Did you have cable growing up?
Yeah.
Okay, so you ever watch Disney Channel?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Fillmore?
Yes.
Of course.
Oh my god.
That's actually no. What's funny? That's part of the reason I really liked this when I watched it. As I guess I must have been like 18. I was out of high school when I first saw this, and it was years after it came out. But that's literally what I thought of while I was watching this for the first time. I'm like, oh, this is like R-rated Fillmore.
Which, okay, I know, first off, I love Fillmore. I was obsessed. And I actually got it after I think it had already done its run on Disney Channel. And they started just showing it on Saturday mornings one time a week on, I think it used to be ABC. But anyway, so that whole thing, that whole vibe and everything was like, so there, it was like, oh my god, are we gonna have like the Brendan series where because it was kind of, it's like, it's like Fillmore, but it's like serious problems like heroin. But
Ryan Johnson, we've got ideas. If you want to cash in with an HBO Max series, we've got, well, actually no, it's owned by Universal Studios, so Ryan Johnson, you got a Peacock series right here. Just cast a younger actor as Brendan, can have a series, brick the TV show.
Exactly. Look to Fillmore for inspiration. Now, speaking, you said it was an R-rated Fillmore. Why was it R-rated? There was like nothing.
Well, I don't know. When you have a teenager blowing someone's brains out, with a gun, that tends to and
that,
also,
yeah, but
again,
that was like PG-13 level of violence.
When a chunk of your head flies out the back, that tends to.
I did not see a chunk of the head. I saw very obviously fake blood spray. I was kind of just like, I watched graphic. This and also, I was like, why is this R? Why is this R? Because I know there's that scene, people talk about the scene at the end, and I'm like, all I heard was mother. I didn't hear anything else. And it's like, we're supposed to like infer what she said, obviously, because he even doesn't repeat it. So it's like, it's like we're just supposed to be like, oh yeah, that's what she said.
There's also the brick of heroin, but once again, just like any other film rating thing, it's the MPAA. I don't think it was.
Please, they've shown bricks of heroin. They've shown bricks of heroin on Castle, so I was kind of
exactly. Well, that's why it could be a Peacock show. It doesn't have to be on HBO Max because they show a brick of heroin on Barney the dinosaur.
I said Castle, not Barney the dinosaur. Okay, but yeah, I was kind of just the rating confused me because I was like 90% sure when I saw like how hardcore and intense they're gonna be that it was gonna be because of like language, and nothing languagey came up, and like nothing that I really saw is nothing I haven't seen like on maybe I'm just like really desensitized, but like on like not cable, but like like antenna TV.
I still think it's hilarious. In our last episode, you said that you wouldn't count Alien as a horror movie. The movie that was so shocking when something burst out of people's chests. It literally had people fainting when it came out.
That happens on Scrubs, so that doesn't mean anything.
I'm just saying, that movie scared people. But yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with you. I don't think this would have been too much for me to handle if I was 13. But what the MPAA is gonna MPAA, what you gonna do? But going back, the other thing I thought was really clever, because if you're going to set something like this in a high school, the obvious question is what's a hard-boiled detective? What kind of teenager are you going to have be, a detective character? Why would they be investigating something? What makes them a loner and stuff like that? So I thought Brendan as a character was kind of interesting, and I touched on that with that last point, when he's talking to the assistant VP. You kind of see where the investigative side of his character comes through, his relationship to the teachers and all that sort of stuff. But there's also some of the flashbacks or like earlier scenes with Emily that are kind of, because essentially he's like the school loner, like he doesn't have friends. And then there's like some history with him and Kara. It seems like maybe they used to date or whatever. So
there's that, and there's also like the fact that he's able to blend into these different social groups pretty easily. Everybody kind of knows of him, but like they don't know him, you know what I mean? And so I really think that added to the to like the detective-y character, because like when this movie ended, I was kind of, I remembered back to the beginning when it all starts, when that note falls out, and I was kind of just like, so does this happen on the daily, or is this an unusual occurrence? Because he seems really good at what he does.
Yeah, exactly. But that was like something I thought was kind of clever is, you don't get a lot of his backstory, but you get kind of the gist that he's sort of that kid that doesn't have any friends. And that was like the line from Emily that sort of, it shows why they broke up, but it also sort of explains what kid he is. Because you're thinking that, I'm sure, for like the first third of the movie, you're like, what clique does he belong to? Like, who does he eat lunch with? Who's he eating with? And she says like, she was getting tired of him just being away from everybody and hating everybody. So like, I think
Emily misunderstood the point of high school.
Right.
Now you talked about, where was I going? So we talked about Brendan's character. And I don't know if this is just the way it was written or the way his character is or the way it was edited, but I totally kind of forgot that he was undercover at the end. Like I kind of felt like, so, and then it wasn't until he like kicks the gun back and runs off. I'm like, oh, that's right. These aren't his people. I'm like, what are you doing? Oh, that's right. These aren't his people. He's not on Tug's side. He's not on anybody's side. He's just trying to figure out what happened.
Something I think I missed when I saw this for the first time, because I hadn't seen as many movies as I have at this point. So Rian Johnson said that he was inspired by Cowboy Bebop and spaghetti westerns. He was talking about the visuals, but I had not. Have you? Well, you haven't watched that many spaghetti westerns, have you?
No, I watched the spaghetti western episode of Bob's Burgers, though.
Well, anyway, so one of the most famous ones, starring Clint Eastwood, is A Fistful of Dollars, and
I've heard of that, yeah.
And that is, of course, basically a retelling of the samurai film by Akira Kurosawa, Yojimbo.
Wait, now, is it Fistful of Dollars the one that has that like famous musical score that shows up like in everything?
Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, that's Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Sorry. Okay, go on.
So both Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars are about a stranger wandering into a town and pitting gangsters against each other until they basically kill each other off and he's left as the winner. And I obviously didn't pick up on it last time because I hadn't seen A Fistful of Dollars. But watching it this time, I was like, oh my god, he's doing that.
Yeah.
Like, he's forcing himself to meet this kingpin. He's causing a wedge in between him and his muscle, and he's basically pouring gasoline on an already big situation and then lighting it and walking away.
You know what? This reminds me of my Nancy Drew's Guide to Life when she said making thugs turn on each other is always a delicious thing to watch.
Yup, and that's basically what he's doing,
Yeah.
which is kind of and it's funny too. Like, you know, I keep saying detective movie when I'm talking about film noir. He does some investigating, and he's able to put the pieces together when he, you know, pins Laura as the one who caused all of this to happen. But a lot of his deduction is more kind of picking up the dynamic of this gang, because the way in which he's able to figure out how he can pick them apart is by him getting the crap kicked out of him by Tug. Because in that bit where he's meeting the Kingpin, he's able to kind of figure out that, oh, Tug doesn't listen to his boss.
Yeah.
You know, he was told to cool off and he's not doing it, and like he's barely able to like take instructions and whatever. So then when he's alone with Tug, you start, oh yeah, like why are you listening to him and stuff? And then like when he's with the Kingpin, it's like, oh, you can't leash your dog. So anyway, it reminded me of A Fistful of Dollars, and it's sort of an interesting aspect of the film where I feel like some of the spaghetti western influence kind of rubbed off on the story rather than the visuals.
Yeah, I would say I didn't really get from like if he said I got the spaghetti western when you describe it like that really can see that in the story. Nothing really about. I mean, again, I also said I haven't seen many spaghetti westerns, but I feel like it's something that if you've ever seen like any sort of like compilation of western scenes, there's always some spaghetti westerns in there, and I feel like I haven't. None of the visuals really gave me a spaghetti western sort of vibe, but definitely when you
No, there's
describe
not
like
a lot of
fistful of
yeah,
dollars
there's
and
not
stuff.
a lot
That's
of
great.
yeah. Spaghetti westerns tend to have kind of a lot of like landscape shots. There's a lot of long takes. There's a lot of, you know, extreme close-ups. That's kind of what you know, inspired that. You don't get that from this. It's funny, visually I get way more of the Cowboy Bebop influence. A lot of the action sequences especially feel very anime-esque, whereas there's not really, I can't really think of there being like, the closest thing I will say, speaking of when the shit hits the fan at the end of the film, when it's Tug versus the Pin, there is sort of a bit of a Mexican standoff going off, and
Yeah,
I'd have
that
to
was something that
rewatch
gave me
the
a
sequence.
western
That's like the
vibe.
one time I can think of where there might have been a visual influence, because like spaghetti westerns, the way you think of it is like, you know, the men standing against each other in a gunfight, and you've got the close up on their eyes, and they're, you know, who's gonna go for the gun first, and the close up on their hands. Like that's spaghetti western cinematography.
The only thing that was missing
And
was
so again,
they were
yeah,
missing
I don't
their
see
thirds. I'm sorry, their seconds.
right.
It's
So
the
yeah,
10 jewel
I don't know about
commandments.
that.
You don't know the 10 jewel commandments?
The 10 dual commandments.
No, yeah. There's a whole rule as to how you do gun jewels. And
Is
one
this
of them
from
is
Bob's
always
Burgers?
no, this is from Hamilton. You send your seconds in to try to solve it and quash the beef. If they can't, you know, you move on to number 3 or whatever it is. Look, it's actually a thing with gentlemen dueling and like how much like there's actually rules to like dueling.
No, I know. There's the very funny scene in Barry Lyndon where it's like, oh, my gun doesn't work. Oh, okay, well, you know, based on the rules, we got to get you a new gun after the first round. Like, so you're going to miss, but you know, we'll get you a gun if you don't get shot to death after this first round. That's just the rules. Yeah, no, but I feel like I've kind of exhausted everything I can talk about. But was there anything that you wanted to add, or anything that was bothering you that you wanted to bring up?
First off, I feel so bad because every time now I see Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I think of his like obnoxious character in um 500 Days of Summer.
Oh, that. Yep, actually, of course, almost forgot. This is the first time we've had him on the show since our episode on 500 Days of Summer.
Yeah.
So.
But no, yeah, it was a very enjoyable movie. I still kind of have my qualms about. I do think it's more like it's a very stylistic movie, and you get props for that. I'm kind of just like, I feel like it's not necessarily a good blend of style and substance. It's lots of style, which is what makes it very enjoyable. And it is rewatchable because you watch it for the comedy, you watch it for, like you said, the dialogue and even the visuals for some people that you talked about. But I still sort of have my previous qualms. I do think it is more of a style over substance movie.
I feel that. I feel that.
But like
What
not
would
about,
you?
I do have a deeper appreciation for it though. When you, especially when you talked about how he came up with a whole set of dialogue for stuff that the teenage show, I still want him to do a series with Brendan where he's like solving mysteries at the high school. Like we need that Netflix series, we need that Peacock series, drop it over the summer or something, 6 episodes per season. I think that could be super interesting.
Ryan Johnson, this is money on the table. You need to get this going because I think it'd be a great show.
What
But
well,
what would
cuz
you give?
even the
Oh,
fact that I was asking, is this like Brendan's everyday life or is this a special occasion? But I would go, and I think you're about to ask me what I would rate this. I would rate
yes.
this. I'm gonna get. See, I hate that, and I know why we do the 4 thing. I still hate it, but I hate it for the reason why we do it because it doesn't make sense. I'm
What
go-
T is talking about, dear viewers, if this is or listeners, if this is the first time you've heard our show, we rate out of 4. We know it's stupid. We know that rating out of 5 or 10 or 100 would make way more sense. But we're doing it sort of as a little jab at the famous film critics Siskel and Ebert because they classically would rate films out of 4 stars.
and
So
dox
we do the
people.
same thing here. And I know what you mean, but yeah, so
Okay, because
as you
because
were.
I kind of want to leave this at 2 stars because I think it's I think it's a very serviceable movie. It's an enjoy. I'm gonna go ahead and give it 2.25 because I feel like 2.5 is too generous. But I kind of want it to be more on the good side. Like this isn't like a bad okay. I don't know. I feel like there's like
Yeah.
a good okay and a bad okay, and this is definitely a good okay. But I did really enjoy it, and I will be watching it again. I just do think that when you think of it as an entire craft and the craftsmanship of the entire piece, I do still think it is stylistically, and we talked about gimmicky over having like a super not complex but more interesting plot, because I feel like you're not watching this for the plot, you're watching this for the weird jokes and the bizarre characters and like you said, even the visuals a little bit. So that's why I'm gonna give it 2.25 stars. I really want to make it clear that this is a good okay, not a bad okay.
I gotcha. And I say the same thing whenever I'm rating movies, especially on our finales, because, so far we haven't had anyone get mad that we know of because no one comments. But,
Oh my god.
but yeah, two out of 4 is still good. In my opinion, if it's lower than that, then that's when you get into a bad movie. Like 2 out of 4 is passable. So I'm going to rate it higher than T. I'm sure anyone could have predicted that. This film's not perfect. It's definitely a first attempt at a feature.
It's a very
by
good first
a
attempt,
young
though.
director.
It's a very good
It
first
is.
attempt.
The reason I'm gonna rate it what I am, I'm gonna give it 3 out of 4. I love the inventiveness. And frankly, that's what I think Ryan Johnson is really good at. I think he's good at having fresh takes on things, and you can definitely, as you said, he's very inspired by kind of genres of a past era, whether it's whodunits, whether it's film noir, whether it's gangster films. Like all of his movies that he's done kind of are these crime genres that you don't see anymore nowadays. Crime is like true crime or like more intense crime dramas, like something David Fincher would do. So it's almost kind of a stylistic upgrade to a callback from an era past, and I think that's kind of a neat sort of niche that he's found himself in. And I know he had a deal with Netflix for like a couple of different Knives Out movies, so I don't know how many he's doing or when that deal's going to be over, but I'd be very interested to see him branch out again and do some other stuff. The other thing that I really like about this movie, as I said while we were talking about it, I think it does understand and value entertainment value. I feel like a lot of the stylistic decisions are a way to engage you rather than to like flex or make you feel like
dumb.
You know, he's not trying to art at you. He's just trying to make an entertaining movie.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that as well. That being said, like the drawbacks are, it is predictable. It is very gimmicky. And it is one of those where, you know, if this genre is like your favorite, I could see this being something that you watch over and over again. But if you're just kind of casually into neo-noirs or film noirs or like high school dramas or whatever, like you might watch this once, you know, and watch it again in a couple of years when it's like, oh yeah, Brick, I haven't seen that in a while.
I still think this should have been called M. I think M would have been a better title. It sounds neo-noir-ish. It sounds 40s-ish, and it makes sense because like we don't even find out the brick until the, you know, like the second half of the movie. It's more about the whole point of this is to find out what happened to Emily and why it happened to Emily.
Exactly. So yeah, and there's that too, and I feel like that probably might not have been his call. Maybe I don't know, like titles like Brick kind of did well in the era this was released, so maybe that's the decision. Bad title. The title is also the reason why I waited to see it for so long, because I assumed it was going to be a very generic movie. But yeah, it's far from perfect. There's definitely some amateurish mistakes that I'm sure you at home could, you know, catch if you decide to watch this. T caught the you know, the trunk thing, and then there were like other ones as well. I remember when I was doing my research, there was like one that I'm already forgetting that was listed on IMDb. But really good first attempt. It's no surprise when you see this, especially with how very little resources Rian Johnson had at the time. Like it's really quite something that this is his debut film outing, and it's not a surprise that every film critic association just gushed about the guy. And again, it's films like this that is what led him to get the job at Disney working on a Star Wars film. So yeah, 3 out of 4 for me. But what do you think? Do you think that I'm too nice? But yeah, if you're listening to this on YouTube Music, you could tell us all about it in the comments. If you are listening to this on any of the platforms, we've got a whole backlog of episodes. You could check out our review of 500 Days of Summer with Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Before we do our sign outs, well, I want you to finish your saying, but before we do our normal sign offs, I have a quote I'd like to kind of just insert it here, but go on.
Just insert it. Let's go for it. What's the quote?
Okay. So just out of context, the people will know what I'm talking about. But this is a quote from the great Guillermo del Toro. History and fable have proven that nothing is ever entirely lost. David can take Goliath, a beach in Normandy can turn the tide of war, bravery can topple the powerful. These facts are often seen as exceptional, but they are not. Every day we all become the balance of our choices between love and fear, belief or despair. No hope is ever too small. That being said, proceed.
Well, oh man, that brings a tear to my eye, see? But until next time, I've been whiskey.
Just forgot who he was.
Chocolate milk.
And I've been the other chocolate milk. Just kidding. I have been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it, Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
Tune in next bat time at the same bat place for another episode of Noir November. And then after that, we have our end of the year finale coming up. If any of you have been around for the last couple of years, you know what it is. If not, be prepared to have us talk about every single movie we've seen this year as a drinking game. See you guys next time. Year's almost over.
Bye, y'all. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.